how about that, Dale? It seems like forever since we've done one of these.
It's been a little while.
So I'm thinking, couple of months?
Yeah.
So obviously we were thrashing to get a car ready for Summer Nats and all those sorts of things, and thanks to Lovell's giving us a little break to be able to do that.
Yep.
And of course now they've come on board to do events, so we're going to be talking a lot more about Lovell's over the next 12 months or so. But we just had a debate about how long ago this car was done, because it seemed like not that long ago, and then when we've gone to have a look, it was about 8 years.
Yes.
So we've mentioned it before, but Dale had a couple of years here at Astill Design, and this was one of the cars that Dale helped us with.
Got the scars to prove
got
it.
Got the scars and busted the knuckles a bit.
Yep.
And at the same time that we're doing this car, I had a computer crash and lost a lot of photos. And thanks to Facebook, that I'd put a lot on there, and there is an album on the Astill Design Facebook page that's got a huge amount of photos of this car. I've been able to grab some from there, some that I already had.
Yep.
And I had someone save a lot of the photos, and I've been able to go through those. And strangely enough, when they recovered it, there was 22,000 photos in one album, and all mixed up.
Yeah.
So you'll need my photos are going to jump around a little bit.
Slightly out of sequence.
I've tried to put as much in as I can, and I've also I don't have any of it before we started. So the first photo we're looking at now, and the first thing I pick up is tailspin trailer, so we're obviously doing tailspin at the same time.
Yes.
Darren's XY in the background there of the wagon, and my Land Cruiser, and all of that stuff's moved on.
Yes.
But this particular car at Marco's, so it's an XA, it was a Fairmont. It had been out to another shop and had the cage put in it and all the fab work done for the twin turbos. And we'll see all of that shortly. And then when I had a look at it, was, I've got a car that's got a little bit of rust, can you have a look for me? So
Just a
little bit of rust. So as you'll see, this era of car, not just Falcons, but your bloody Holdens as well, pretty much obviously rust a bit. So we'll move straight into it. And it was a vinyl roof car, and we were lucky that the vinyl roof had obviously stayed together.
Yes.
But I do recall you taking the glue off of that.
And
I found a product at the time from Bunnings that's actually a glue remover, and it's made for concrete floors when you stick your tiles down with adhesive.
Okay.
And it works a treat. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but we use that to get that off. And it's interesting how the factory don't even paint the roof. They only put the primer on it and paint the edge of it when they're doing the rest of the car. So we stripped all that off, and then as you can see here now, the typical rust areas. So sills, the kick panels, tail lights. I'm sure when we did this, we actually had a piece made up to go across the back, and of course now there's a complete tail light panel available. It's very cost effective. And then all around the back window area, and you can see there it's starting to get stripped down pretty well. So we got the sills off it and got the plenum off it, and then I know this one's a little bit out of sequence, but we took it to the blaster, to Steve Friend up at Wollongong, North Wollongong, to actually blast it for us, and then we're still back in the workshop. So plenum, typical Falcon. I'm going to start the van shortly, and when we do that, even if the plenum looks good, I'm still going to take the top off it and have a look.
Big copy and paste, because the cars are 50 years old, and
and they
don't last forever.
They've all got that problem. So you can see there the sills off. So this is before it went in. Now people always ask you about, can I take the sills off without bracing the car? My answer is always yes. This one was a little bit easier again, 'cause it's got a full roll cage in it, so that was obviously going to help. And you can just see when you start cutting those sills off, if you just did a little patch-up job, the amount of stuff you'd miss.
It won't last long.
No, it's a bit of an issue all round. So through that process, get it ready for the blaster, and you can see the rubbish on the floor there that's just coming out of the A-pillars.
That was a constant job.
Yeah.
That's pre-blasting too.
So we're now blasted. So when it comes back from the blaster, I like to get it back, handle everything with gloves, and then get a coat of the Vibrance epoxy on it straight away. And that product's really good to work with, where you can then clean it up fairly quickly and easily and weld around it, and it doesn't hinder when you're doing the welding. No. So you can see here, with all the cars I've done so far, I haven't had to do the torque boxes, but it's surprising how many torque boxes I sell.
Yes.
So there's obviously people doing, bigger rust jobs than what we've been doing. Yep. So once again, the inner sill there, we've been able to salvage that, clean it all up and get some black 2K on it. And then what we're looking at there now, I don't know if you remember this, Dale, but because it's running a fairly stout sort of engine, we needed to get some decent fuel lines through, and Marco asked me about running some solid lines. So there's stainless steel fuel lines inside the sill. And then we pressure tested those before we sealed it all up.
Pretty substantial size too.
To get that fuel, because you'll see later on it's running 3 pumps and all sorts of goodies, and we'll get to that shortly.
Yep.
So the new sills are on, and then starting to plug weld that all back together. And A-pillars, so sills first, then start fabbing up. This is a little bit out of sequence because I know there's a couple of worse ones in a minute. But I've tried to just put like all the sill together, then all the A-pillar together. So that's all prepped up now for some more epoxy. And then once I get it epoxy, I'd go through then and put some light filler on to get rid of all those plug welds. So now we move on to the A-pillar and that, what nowadays I call a half kick. So from the A-pillar forward is, half the kick panel. You can buy the whole piece now.
Yep.
But when we were doing this, pretty much none of it was available. So plenum there after it's come back from the blaster, and I don't know whether I end up pulling that all the way off. Yep. At the top? No, that's the bottom. Yeah, so I ended up coming off. So nowadays I'd just take it all off and get it blasted separately, and then making those repairs for the vents. And then the next one here now is the A-pillar, and you can see there I've obviously started treating that with a bit of acid and making a little repair on the top, and it really is a case of peeling it back, getting a look inside and see what you're dealing with, and start making all those bits and pieces. Oh, there's not much left there, Dale.
No. Bit of air holding that together.
A bit drastic. So then here we go. So we start making the bits and pieces, and once again that's made out of 2 pieces, welded up, ground up, and then fitted to the job. I often look at, for people, if you're doing this from at home, you don't have to try and make the whole shape out of one piece. You can. It's a lot easier.
Yep.
Make it out of cardboard first and work out the minimal amount of pieces, but you don't always have to make it out of one piece.
Piece it together.
And obviously starting to patch it all up to be able to start thinking about putting it back together.
You have had the benefit of doing a couple of these Falcons and a few of these similar rust repairs.
Yeah, so and of course,
they're all the same.
I mean, if you're doing your own car, and when I do the van, I'll be a bit different. I mean, you can buy a panel for X amount of $100, or you can mess around with a little bit of steel and some of your own time, and it's cost effective to do it exactly the way I've done it here.
Yep.
And it was done like this because it was prior to those sort of parts being available. And the same as, so this is the top of the plenum now.
Yep.
So those side rust areas where we're repairing those, once again, you can buy that whole top section, but I, with my own car, would still do it the way we're doing it there.
Even with those top hats, they were non-existent.
No, they weren't. It's only been the last couple of years that's been available, and now this whole lower section's available in 2 pieces. So that's, I'm not sure whether that was 2K or whether I actually used the POR 15 on that, which is a very sturdy product. And obviously masked up, and the dots you can see there is where I would have back masked, or we've given it a bit of a wire wheel to get ready to weld the top back on it. And speak of the devil, there's the top going back on it.
Good sequencing, Howard.
Yeah, very good. So once I got all that together and it's all epoxy, the reason I put this in is it's important that we now keep all that air and moisture out of those areas, so for longevity of the car. So what you're looking at there is just like a Sika automotive sealant. And we run that around and then clean it up with Prepsol before we go the next stage, which would be primer and then on to paints or a stone guard. But it's, to me, worth that extra effort to make sure it's all sealed up.
Yep.
And it looks like there's a bit of painting going on the other side as well, Dale, with all that tape there.
It's an easy step to miss, and it makes a big difference at the end.
Yeah, and it's easier at that stage. Being a paintable product, I put it on normally either be in an area like that where I'm not rubbing, I'm going to put it on before because I'm going to wet the primer and the colour. If it's on the outside the car or an engine bay, I'm going to do my primer first.
Yep.
Get it all rubbed down. Then I'm going to put the sealer in.
Yep.
And then I'm going to shoot my colour over that. So we're getting somewhere here now. So except the fact it's way out of sequence because the top of the plenum's not on it. But once again, it's epoxy to get everything sealed up. And then that's what I was talking about earlier. So now it's a skimmer filler, get all that shaped up. And this particular car, not being a genuine GT, was done as a look-alike, like a XA 4-door GT delete stripe was the brief, I guess. Yep. So we weren't worried about trying to main spot welds. So there is the ability to put the marks back in where the spots would have been, but in this case we're looking for that nice clean finish look. So A-pillars and then back door areas. And then what we're looking at now is the back of the car there, and doing that boot rubber area where they all go. And like I said, that taillight panel's now available, and also the boot corners with the removable little pieces. At this point in time, we still don't have the top corners, but I normally use a coupe corner, or in this case, when it's really bad like this one, we've actually fabbed up a bit of cardboard off the original, and then make the piece up and then shape it up and get it in there. The little block there that holds the back window in place, we've got those as well now. I've got a guy that made those up for me, so that once again you don't have to be trying to salvage those little cheap as chips.
Part list has grown since I was working for you, Howard, when we probably had 6 or 8 items initially.
It's into the hundreds now, I think. So that whole boot area, once again, we're not chasing. We're looking for the panels to show the overlaps, but not worrying about spot welds, and you'll see how that comes out shortly. It'll come out really good. So you can see there where the rust has gone up into the quarter a bit. And I mean, this was a pretty good car to look at before we stripped it. And
well, the customer said it had no rust, didn't it?
No, he didn't say that. He said it wasn't too bad.
Okay. No, maybe just what everyone thinks.
I guess, rust in all the usual places.
Yeah, there's always rust.
So there's that filler work going on again. So it's really a case of getting in there and making it look nice and clean. I must have liked that. There's plenty of photos. So what we're looking at now is a genuine XA GT front guard that's had a bit of a life. So you can see the nose there, and I said to Mark, you can get these in repo now. He said, I really want to try and keep it as much original as possible. I can live with that. So I started smacking it up, and then he found another guard that had been hit in the back area. So we ended up making 1 out of 2. So you can see there where I've grafted from the top corner down into the wheel arch, and then obviously the normal rust repair on the lower rear of the wheel arch as well. So you end up a bit of a patchwork quilt like that.
It's effective, that.
And you can see what looks like welds. The guard had a protection pack, so it had those little knobs all the way along that needed a bit of welding as well. And this particular guard, which is I think the other side, someone had knocked the lips up, but to knock them up, they cut it with a pair of snips every inch or so. So I just took that piece out and put another one in, and I put these in to show people that you can actually do a lot with an old panel if it's your own time. It's not cost effective if you're paying someone 100 an hour or 120 an hour or whatever the current rate is, but it is possible to do that. And you can see there that I always talk about that area where the badge goes. Once you start welding and carrying on, you normally got to do a few heat shrinks in there because it just wants to oil can. So that's it there now, looking a little bit neater.
A lot healthier.
And then once again, I've had the inner out of that, make sure the rust is all out from behind, like that, and then get some paint on it. And then once you're all done, it looks like that.
Looks $1 million.
So one of the things I like to try and do as well, I don't say don't try, we do, is to get both sides the same. So if you stick your head on the inside, it's not going to have a big weld or whatever showing. We're going to tidy that up as well. So it had a pretty good looking bonnet, because the XA GT bonnets are as rare, or probably rarer than the BC ones. And I don't know whether someone had stripped it and primed it or whether it was a new old stock or whatever, but it's like everything. When you pull it apart, it's amazing what you find.
It looked good on the outside.
So this is just another one of those good examples. If you blasted this bonnet complete and then give it a coat of paint, it would look fine for probably another 5 years, and then old Jack the Dancer would be back. So you can see just how deep the pits are there. So it looks like we're on the acid and the Scotch Brite. And then getting a bit closer there, and then where that rust has been, and I know you're going to see it, I'm obviously putting a bit of primer in so that when we go through the process we can sort that out. And then you can see there all those bits have gone off to be blasted straight back into the booth with the epoxy on it.
And it wasn't a unique thing to Ford, but any cars in that vintage where you've got those sandwich panels and they use... What's the material they used to try and seal it up? But it was almost water absorbing.
In a lot of cases, it was used as an anti-flutter. You know, like it was there so you didn't get a vibration.
Yes. Yeah.
And for whatever reason, the products they used in the 70s seemed to either absorb moisture, or were acidic, or both, and they caused more problems than they helped. The other problem was they were assembled in bare metal, and sprayed, not dipped. Where nowadays, you know, the later model cars are E-coated, where they're actually dipped into a tank and they come out and, it gets in everywhere. So we'll see when we get to the paint section, you'll see where that bonnet ended up. But what I've got now is just some photos of the roof, and it's surprising once again with this aged car. All of these cars went through a phase where they weren't worth much. So they ended either in a yard where the kids were walking on them, or they were the bomb that you took down the beach and sat on the roof and had pizza or whatever.
Strap the surfboard directly to the roof.
That's it.
Type of idea.
So they always seem to need a bit of work. So you can just see there where I've got the flippers going and a file and just working my way around and pushing it back into shape. And I like to get them within, a mil or two, and then put a skim. So, re-prime with epoxy, and then a skimmer filler and block them out. This particular car, I didn't remove the lead. It had no signs of anything coming undone on the edges. You can normally pick on the edges, and I think it was the fact that it had that vinyl roof and it hadn't broken through.
Pretty sealed up well.
So it was pretty sealed up. But of course, they normally need a bit of a pull on the... I think that might have been the one we made it for, because they always seem to have that impression in the quarter panel. So that's just a plate that I've made with a big nut welded to it that I can put on my slide hammer and just pull that panel up and run my Tassie oak across and get a line. It had a little hit in the rear that was a bit of a dodge job from the panel beater at some stage. It was bogged up, so I've just knocked that back into shape and just getting the lines right. And we've seen a lot of that in some of the more recent ones. That back bumper fits well, Dale.
It does. What's going on there?
It's probably not far off how it was bolted up. Oh dear. So you can see there just how much is showing there where I've hit that with the file. So, normally, could spend up to half a day pushing them around. And then the photo here is just where I'm adding to the end of the doors to get our door gaps. And I thought I'd put this in because it's a bit of a dodgy looking thing, but sometimes when you're trying to get all these frames and all to fit, it just won't go.
No.
So you've either got to cut all the welds or just give it a slice, and you can see how much I've pushed that, and where the hole is there for the door rubber, we've made a bit of a mess. But I thought I'd put that in because we've had the skin off it. By the look of the welding and the backs of the doors and all, and when I've gone to get it all to align, they physically don't fit.
No.
To get them to look really nice.
They were never fantastic from the factory, were they?
No. So I was saying about not a bad looking car till it goes to the blaster. So there's a good example. That door looked pretty good before it went to the blaster. And nowadays I tend to look for another door or better skins or whatever. This particular time I put a bottom on. And once again, on hourly rate, it can get away from you a bit because when you go to weld it, then you're chasing it and trying to make it work. And we got there in the end, but so that's the bottom on, I think, both those doors by the look of it, and then obviously working our way around to some gaps. So that was before the front door was done because I can see the rust down the bottom edge there, the holes in it. So a lower on there, and then now we're starting to do door gaps. So that's a good example of Ford's gap. And just, the bit of a waver and the direction. And that's not unusual. That's pretty much the standard.
No, quality standards and manufacturing techniques and
so
all that.
So then once we start to grind up and have a play, and normally on a rear door there on a sedan and even on a coupe, I'm going to do the work on the door, not on the quarter. Because if I try and weld the quarter, unless it's not straight on the line, once you put heat into that quarter, if you start to lose it, you're really going to chase your tail for a fair bit of time. So that's that back door that had that bit of operation going on the inside. And what I'm looking for there is to get my line of the door straight, but then when that top rail goes up around the roof line, that it's sitting in position as well. And they're actually quite sturdy when you try and bend them. So I find it's better to give it a little slice.
Little persuasion.
And now we're looking there, that looks like all the gaps are done. And so people always ask, I try and work around the 5.5 mil in steel, and that ends up, depending on how much product goes on it. I did this car myself, so not as much product as say Boss XC, but that 5.5 would turn into 5 to 4.8, something like that, mil gaps when you're done. So looking down the side, you can see the file's been run down that now. So this is all getting ready to get into the last stage of epoxy. Whoa.
We better see if the engine fits.
So this was what I was talking about that was done before we got it. So the car had been to a fab shop and had the twin turbos fitted. And I've got a little thing somewhere, it'll pop up in a minute exactly what turbos they are, which I'll be able to tell you. And they had basically located the engine, put the cutouts in for the RS front end to make room, and it's a Windsor-based Ford, run on the twin turbos, and the plan was to run a 20 by 10 and or a drag slip of a certain size. We pretty much worked out if we just squared up the rear part of the rear
inner guard.
The wheel tub, that's what I'm looking for. That we could actually just give it a bit more space without making it look like it's tubbed. So it was really just a case of giving it a bit more room in that back quarter. And once it had a little bit of filler after we'd finished playing around, it looks reasonably stock. So the car came to us with leaf spring, with a 9-inch already made up effectively to take the drive line, and the rear cross members and all were made. And then once we got involved in it, and I spoke to Marco about what his ambitions were in relation to he's going to run it at the track and all those sorts of things, the sort of power it was going to make, he opted to run a Gazzard Brothers single leaf, a mono leaf, with the what I call basically a cow track lower arm, which is someone else's brand, so it's a Gazzard arm. And you'll see in a minute where the diff was already boxed up in order to run a normal leaf spring, so we had to chop all that up to get the Gazzard set up on it, and it was actually set up where you could change blocks where it bolts to the diff to actually lower the car or raise the car. So it actually had a bit of adjustability in it, and then it had this big kick-ass sway bar on it that ran on it, bolted to the diff with the arms then going to the body. Rather than what we traditionally see the other way around. So you can see it there now where we've actually changed the brace in the middle for clearance to the tank, and the arms sort of on the angle going this way are the sway bar arms going up, and then adjustable shocks from Gazzard, and then the leafs. And at this point it's still got the original mount on the rear where it mounts to the body, but the Gazzard setup has a slipper, and it actually slides up and down on a roller bearing and mounts to that plate. So we've welded those plates onto the rail, and you can see just to the top left where the original bush used to go through, and that has a slipper set up so that when the spring goes like this, instead of binding or having those arms like the traditional arms, it actually, which I think called a spring saddle, anyhow, trying to think of the word.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
The shackle
so
on the back
it
of the
slides.
spring,
Yeah. So we've mounted all that up.
Yep.
And then that's it there. Once it's got a whole lot of paint and all looking a bit more pretty. So that's sort of the rear end's in. The front's done. We're working through the process of making that work because I need to get all that sorted before we start thinking about painting the body.
Yes.
So Marco wanted to run some 6-spot Brembos, the ones I like, the same as on the current build and on my ute and everything else. And he had someone lined up to paint them, but it all fell apart. They'd been stripped and then they came back to me and I ended up painting them just in 2K, same as I did with my ute ones as well. And then some eBay stickers and then cleared over the lot. And I did my ute 2 years ago, I think now, and they're still fine. A lot of people say, does that work? I go, well, yep. I did mine and they're still going.
2 years gone and it's still looking good.
And then at 4 spots on the rear.
Yep.
So it's got plenty of braking power.
Well, it needs it.
It does.
Because there's plenty of grunt.
So this is obviously well into it, but I thought I'd throw it in because it just shows that rear end, the way it sets up, and then the monster exhaust. Once again, the exhaust was done, but once we got it all mocked up, it was way too low for a street car, so we actually modified it to get it up to get some decent ground clearance. So we've sort of done getting all that running gear sorted, and looking at now back on the body, you can see there's just a bit of filler in the gutter. We'd always get our mouldings for the glass and try and make sure that the body fits the glass and the mouldings.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to change them than it is the glass.
So important to do it before we get...
You go to put it together once it's painted and go, oh, it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And once again, this car being a Fairmont had the stainless trims on the pillars, so that's the little bit of filler here and there where the factory whacked the tech screws in it. So working our way through all those little bits and pieces, which I'm sure you were part of, Dale, to get it all cleaned up to start doing that final coat of epoxy like that one there by the look of it. So it's interesting there that it's in the rotisserie for me to paint it, but it's still got the frame on it, the other wheel hanging down. So it must have been just in to get the epoxy and then back on the ground once it was done. So all of those bits, you get the body done, now we got the rest of it. So all of the other parts then, and I'm not sure exactly on the sequence here, but I'd nearly reckon these, come back from the blasters. And then once I've got all of that ready, it's back on the stands for me to do the filler work. And if people have been watching these, or if it's your first time, I like to get it all in epoxy, full skim the whole panel, and you can see there where all the rub throughs are. So I'm using it almost like high build primer.
Yes.
Because I'm not comfortable in loading the car up with a whole lot of high build, because I believe you lose a lot of the shape of the car when you do that. So full panels over the whole body, and then I normally then, once I've comfortable I'm getting close, I'll put a coat of epoxy over the whole lot again.
Yep.
Let it dry for a couple of days, and then I'll go back and block out the shape. Use my tape to get my lines and all.
Yep.
And you can see there I'm probably getting old now, mate, doing the lower sections on the rather than laying around on the ground.
Getting smarter.
Getting smarter.
Work smarter, not harder.
So this would be that case of getting all areas ready to go to start thinking about some primer. So the engine bay has obviously had those towers cut out, and then once again we're just looking to have it really clean. We've still got overlaps on panels. We're not looking to fully weld, and it's not a full show car build. It's more of a factory style look, and that's our first one now in primer. So I like to put on 3 coats of high build. So this probably was a different product then, and the products are evolving, and I've been using the Vibrance high build, and that now is being superseded into another part number as I speak.
Yep.
But pretty much the same product, so it's a high build primer rather than a poly.
Yep.
So a poly is like a filler that you spray on with a hardener, but with poly you can't wet rub it because it's porous.
Yes.
Whereas the primer you can wet rub. I now dry rub everything, but it just comes from what you used to do, I guess.
What works. And
so you can see here now I've blocked all that out, found a few highs, found a few lows, little bit of fine filler there on the edges, just trying to get all those lines how I want them. Get all that bay looking good.
Yep.
So the trace coat I'm using there is the Merca dry trace, and there's a few other brands in pressure packs and stuff that I've been experimenting with, but this has been my mainstay for some time. A little bit messy, but it works really well. So you just coat the whole thing, and you can see there now I'm using the Merca pad, and I'd probably be on 180 or 240, and just block all that back out, chase my lines out, get myself organised. And if I get it right, and you don't always get it right, if I get it right, you can effectively block it out with your 240, and then I'm just use the same product but thinned down as a primer. And then I then go 400, 800, and I'm ready for colour. Yeah. So that's the process I normally try.
It would have looked all right as a two-tone, by the way.
Yeah. So this is obviously well advanced because I can see some colour around the place, so it might be a little bit out of sequence. Once again, I like to trial fit the vents, the badges, all that sort of stuff, so that you're not messing about.
Much easier than when it's painted.
Paint on it.
Yep.
Exactly right. And we can see, things are starting to look nice now with our lines and all those bits and pieces on it.
Back
bonnet to the now. So that would be in that last phase, looking how nice that looks in the lights there. I'd say that's the last coat of primer before colour. And then that body's now has got the stone guard on it, so I'm sure there's a couple of shots following that. Here we go. So I've got my primer on, so now I've put the stone guard on the underside. And I always laugh when I see this photo because I come out and I said to Darren, put them doors out, and they come out of the booth, and I walked out and three of them were in a line like that and one was spun around the other way, and I walked out and looked at him, and before I could say anything he went over and spun it around. I said, what are you doing? He goes, I knew that to play on your mind. So I'm not OCD at all.
No, not
at all.
No.
So there's Marco.
No.
So most of the cars that I've done, not most, a large percentage of the cars that I've done, I try and involve the owner. And even with Boss XC, Peter works overseas, but he has been here on a few occasions for a day or two helping to rub a bit. And Marco used to come down on a Friday night and just help out with what we were doing at the time. And there's two reasons for that. One is they're involved, but second, they understand the time.
Get an appreciation of the effort.
Of what it takes to get all of these things done to the level.
You think, I'm just going to rub a door, we should be done in an hour.
Yeah,
no,
and you go, here, paint the inside of the door.
Yep.
So, stone guard. So, I've used quite a lot of different products. Marco specifically wanted the Sika stone guard because he was, had a mate or whatever. Someone was in his ear that's the one to use. So we used that, and I was really happy with that. And then they stopped bringing it in, as they do. And that's like a really nice looking finish for that sort of resto-y style look.
Yep.
So I tend to put it on where the factory had it, but I like to do it more consistent because the factory was just a flick.
Slap pad.
Wherever.
Yep. Slap happy at the
So I've got that done, and where the back mask is now is ready to do all of those shuts. So I'd be looking to actually paint the door jambs, the sills, and the engine bay by the look of it, which we'll see in a minute. There we go. So that's all masked up to start taking some colour.
And then summer gold, wasn't it? How was it summer gold, or was that the original colour?
Summer gold, yeah, that was the original colour, and that's the colour it ended up. I just had it mixed in the current style of paints, but to the original colour. And that's me there with the gun in hand, contemplating by the look of it. It's like, here we go, get ready to pull the trigger. So this particular car, Marco specifically asked me if I would do all of the paint on the car. Because I always say, look, we'll just take it somewhere. Oh, can't you do it?
He got nervous.
Can't you do it?
He trusted you, Howard. That's a good thing.
He did. So I said, yeah, righto, I can do it. It's just it's a time thing, and the booth is limited in size. So away we go. So we get the inside done. So this is all base coat. So where it's got that nice matte look as the base coat, and if there's one out of sequence like that, it'll be shiny. So get all of that colour on. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because it's an iridescent colour. I want to paint the whole outside the car in one go, so that we don't get any variation in colour.
No, that's right.
So you do the insides first, back mask everything, do the outside, pull it all, clear it, pull it all apart, and then make sure your edges are all good, and then clear it all again. So this is that bit we were just talking about, but I've unmasked the edge now.
Yep.
So now I'm going to back mask that door jamb and paint the outside, and then you come back in with your torch, and if you've got a little overlap or a bit of something showing, you can just put a little bit of colour on before you put the last coat of clear on.
Yep.
So there, where are we up to now? So we've got masking. I've masked the bay off by the look of it and cleared the rest. So now the car's assembled. Doesn't need to be gapped 100% because we're just painting.
Yes.
And you can see the scuttle is on there and set back a bit so that I can make sure it's the same colour, because depending who you talk to, everyone has a different theory on it. But if you're painting downwards rather than sideways, the colour will vary a little bit. So if you paint the bonnet hanging up, for instance, and then the tops of the guards, the flake will lay down different, and it'll change the colour. So the idea is to mock it all up. We did the same with Tailspin, we did the same with Boss XC. So, doesn't that look good with the lines in the matte?
It does look for a matte finish.
Yeah, and I showed Marco that after the event because he wasn't there the night I painted it. I painted it at night. And he goes, oh, if I'd have seen that, I would have got you to do matte clear on it. I go, yeah, that's why you didn't get to see it. But it did look really cool.
Yeah.
So that was it.
You can see why people go with matte wraps these days.
You can.
Yep.
And then, of course, you put the clear on it.
But that looks pretty special.
And the colour really pops.
Yeah. There's some good lines in that.
So you get to that point now where you go, I'm just about done, but you're actually not done, because now you've got to pull it all apart again. Go through and check all those edges and block it all back again with 800. Make sure it's all where you want it. And then the terminology that's always used is flow coat. Now, because of my sort of style booth, just an end draft, I'm always going to colour sand and polish the whole thing. Because if you're doing it if you got lucky and you didn't get a lot of rubbish in it, you could probably just do a couple of little bits, denibs and buff those out. But I was always planning on blocking it back and doing it. So at this point, I'll call it a flow coat, but I'm putting 3 coats on it because I'm going to chop it with 800 and work my way back through the grades.
So pardon my ignorance, but when you're doing something like Tailspin, where that was at PPG, completely different style of booth. Yep. In terms of how the airflow and
I guess it's
thing,
like a commercial booth that any panel shop's got. If the booth's set up properly and they're working every day, if they paint a whole car, they should only get half a dozen bits and pieces in it that they've got to chop out. When we do something like Boss XC, when the whole thing's painted the first time, it looks awesome. But then you just keep laying more and more clear on it so I can block it all back dead flat. So it looks the best with a couple of coats on it, like it was in a normal panel shop. But once you start laying extra coats on, it gets heavier, and that's so I've got enough clear to cut it back off again. With, so it's almost 2 different things. And because of the way I'm set up here, I'm going to always fully colour sand and polish because that's my style anyhow. So for me, I don't think I've ever done anything off the gun. Oh, the tailgate on the Utes off the gun. But it's one panel. So you know, less chance of getting rubbish in it. So this has all been, rubbed, check all the edges, little touch up here and there. 3 more coats of clear, and then you'll see in a minute. So once again, the doors are off now. It's a lot easier to paint that clear with the panel flat. Because you're just laying it on. And you look at that and go, why would you even want to sand it and polish it? But to get it all consistent, you need to do that. Is the key, and because of the size of the booth, I've got like 4 runs to do. Runs as in time through the booth, not dripping runs.
No, we avoid them.
So go through, and then inside, outside. So the amount of masking and messing about to do this type of work is quite considerable. And then being an XA, the door trims don't cover the whole door, and they had the trim colour down to the rubber. So it's another process, another mask, another coat. And then, of course, once you got some colour on, you can't help but sit a wheel under it.
You've got to mock it up a little.
Have a bit of a look, see what it's going to look like.
See if those big bags fit under the
back
wheel arches.
So those guards were looking
was
really
a good colour. From a Holden man for a poo brown, it come up really good.
And I mean, the problem is you get one of these cars as a barn find, they look terrible because they've got no shine.
Yep.
Once even the original colour comes up, they look really good.
It is a good colour, absolutely.
So now I don't know that I've ever done a full roll cage in a car before either. So now we've got to backmask the whole car.
Can't be that hard, Howard. Someone's done it before.
Backmask it all. We're out of sequence again by the look of it. I mightn't have them before I painted. So you got to backmask everything but the cage and those inner pillars, and then paint all of that the same colour as the backs of the doors, which is obviously the trim colour, was saddle, and then the dash is black. So, it was brown as well, I think. Anyhow, a long process to work through.
A lot of fiddling.
To get all that done. Then you backmask the whole lot again to do the blackouts. So, XA, so across the back of the boot, all that area there's black. So then we go into that
blackouts
nice satin black.
And the windows,
and radiator support.
The
underguard. So now we're at that point, was a brown dash, see there across the top?
Yep.
So now we're at that point where we finally get to assemble. And so that's off the gun, and you can see the bottom set of fluoro, see the orange peel in it?
Yep.
And then up further it's not as heavy.
Yes.
So I'm not chasing even orange peel when I'm doing that because I know I'm going to cut it like that. So then I'm going to jump on with the hard block, and on this last build I've used the splines to actually chop all that peel out.
You know that system works well for you because you've done it
so many times.
Yeah.
So that's getting there now. Got the big lambs will go in there, buffing that out with me light, and there's nice reflection on the roof. And then the hard part about doing that process is the edges, getting all those little, and we've got more tools now. We've got the little Merca battery polishers and all that sort of stuff, but that you can't beat that sort of finish. I love that, and I polish most of the panels. That guard there's bolted down, like where it bolts onto the top of the guard to the body.
Yep.
I actually have a block of wood screw to a timber table with some tech screws in it, so I can actually physically polish looking straight down rather than trying to polish on the side of the car because it's just too hard on your body. And then inside's obviously all cleared and looking wonderful. Underside of the bonnet. Ooh, look at that one, Dale, off the gun.
King of bling.
Get lucky sometimes, eh? And then obviously with a bit of that might have been off the gun too, although I think it probably polished because it looks a bit good. So now that's that door being assembled, so the rubber's on it and the door trim's going to go down and still show that brown edge. Yep. And then our black, the mirror's on, door handle's in, and then the black.
There's always something to paint, Howard, isn't there?
Unbelievable. And I guess it wouldn't matter what sort of car it is, but once you've got the body done, you then got all of these parts.
Remember the Fiat, how many bits on the Fiat?
I know, a little tiny car.
Tiny little thing. Where is it? Over here.
Over there.
Up here.
So then, we go into assembly and we start painting stuff. And you can see the wet floor there, that keeps the dust down because this stuff is all satin black, so I'm trying to minimise that. And then even this one, we painted all the trim. So all of those plastics, getting harder and harder to get. So we needed saddle, backs of the seats.
Yep.
So that was like a plastic additive added to the paint with the interior with a satin finish.
So it gives it a bit of elasticity or something.
Yeah, and even pinch weld and all, we needed to have that. They were factory coloured. And then more suspension parts, engine parts, and so the prep was done over there. You can see the breathers have been welded on. And now getting towards getting a bit of colour on some of those bits and pieces.
Getting ready for that Astill design badge in the engine bay, isn't it?
That's it. So polishing the rocker covers.
Yep.
All your bolts.
Yep.
And look what's in the background.
So
what did we work out? What year did we work out this was?
It was around October or so 2014, I think, that it sort of came in, and then we went to,
that was
2016 April or something like that?
Some of that's 30. We're actually doing the brakes and all on it there, so that was after some of that's 30 was when the car went there. So about 6 years ago at that point.
Doesn't sound like long.
No. So that's looking pretty done there, but it's a good example of a couple of things. The fuel tank we're looking at there is not the tank. So what the fab guy had done was cut the top out of the tank, and it then became a shell that the drop tank sat in.
The belly shell.
And you can see a bit of a round hole on the right-hand front there. It was the drain plug.
There you go.
And then we've talked about the diff and the exhaust, and then it was running on a turbo 400, and then the brakes on it, because it had 4-spot Brembo rears, and I think we're off an FG, we needed to run the cables off a BF or an FG ute that crisscrossed across the back of the diff because it pulled inwards.
Yes, not on the angle.
On the calipers that he'd sourced. So there's always these little things, and I always talk about one modification leads to two that leads to three, and this was no different.
No.
So it had the usual strange super duper centre because it was going to make quite a bit of horsepower. Yep. So there we go. There's the bracketry and all for that cable.
Yep.
So we had the cables made locally, but they needed to pull sideways, whereas all the early Falcons pulled forward.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was just one of those little things we had to sort out. And now we've got the rear on it, and the wheel in the background's off Rock 3. Because if you're wondering why it's the wrong shape.
Yeah. Not for this car.
Can't help myself to always look at what's in the background. So taillights, we had 2 or 3 sets to get enough bits and pieces to make a good set. And here's my old mate from Working Class Windscreens doing our glass, putting some moulds on. So front and rear screens. And I like the way he paints the black around the edge so you don't see, because that's actually not on the screen when you get it.
No, okay.
He marks it out,
Yep.
paints that on before it goes on.
Okay.
So like on the Boss XC, because the dash was wider, the stripper across the bottom's quite wide, so you don't actually look at the fabric and all when you look through the glass. Rear moulds, the back windows on the sedans are nothing like a coupe.
Much easier.
And then Marco opted, we use one of those aftermarket stereos where it looks like an old one but it's got a remote control behind.
Right, okay.
Put some decent quality speakers in it, but then ran the original covers so that once it's all together you can't see none of it.
Yep.
And that was just covered in the brown vinyl. And in the boot, pretty much stock except someone stuck a roll cage in there and it ended up with a CO2 bottle and all the other good bits for the Go Fast stuff. But everything else was pretty much done as a resto, and the same in the bay. So booster, master cylinder, wipers, all that stuff was all original. And then even though it had a lot of extra...
Other fuel lines.
And even though it had a lot of extra wiring, it was all ran... You know, we didn't look to hide it.
No.
We were trying to make it look like a Ford. And then this was one of those issues, once you go extra horsepower, all those sorts of things, this was a cooler for the engine oil.
Yeah, okay.
So it had
not a trans cooler, an engine oil
cooler and a trans cooler on the opposite side. So it had one of each.
Yep.
And then all those bits and pieces that you get to paint and work your cat out. So we're obviously just doing a mock-up there before we go into assembly. And then once again here now, all those nice little bits and pieces, you know, your mouldings and your clips and all back to original. And then I talked earlier about the 3 pumps, so that's...
There's a lot going on with this tank.
3 electric pumps in there, into a filter, and then the way, I'm trying to think, it was a Holly EFI setup, and the computer actually controls how many pumps it runs. So if you're just idling down the road, it doesn't have all 3 pumps running, it only runs the pumps that it needs. And all of these jobs I take on, I always learn that little bit more about the process, because I'd never worked on a turboed car before. So I've got a little tag here to let me know. So the turbos are a Borg-Warner S300, Dale.
Okay.
And that's leading into this photo. And we set this up for Street Machine Mag. So that's it out of the car with all of the bits bolted on with a few plastic ties holding it together, just to give you an idea of the complexity of the way it
There's a little V8 in there somewhere.
Exactly right. And then you can see on the left-hand side down low the little pump there with the pulley on it. That's an external oil pump.
Right.
And that was one of those little things that got added after the event, because the engine, when it came to me, was just going to get a freshen, and then it ended up going up the West End and got a big freshen, and they put an external pump on it because of the amount of horsepower it was going to make and a whole lot of things, which then meant we had to change some pipes. But we got there.
Yep.
So besides that, you're pretty much looking at the twin turbos, the wastegates, and then the wastegates, the controllers on those are all controlled by CO2. So the computer controls the wastegates.
Yep.
So to give you whatever horsepower you need to leave off the line and all those sorts of things. So a lot of lines. It was running power steer as well, as you can see on the right there, top right. So all of that stuff was put in, and then at the same time we're still trying to keep underneath looking factory-ish.
The staple the little bits of rubber on the, was that the inner guard?
Yeah, so that's the factory staples.
Yep.
So that was sort of part of the brief, was just where we didn't need to change anything. We'll just keep it looking factory. We did remove some, because it had a 20B8 on the front, we trimmed some of that down a bit to give us a bit more clearance. And it was running an RRS front end in it. And the photo now of the table with the speedflow bag in the middle is Phil Kurjean's from Fuelworks is on the job. So twin turbo, 3 pumps,
Phil
breathers.
You would have loved it.
Breathers, oil drains on the turbos. There was just stuff going everywhere. And then external oil coolers, external trans coolers.
So obviously he didn't use one table. He would have had more than one table.
We had a couple going on. And you can see there that this the way I work. So there's a table with the trim stuff on it. The guards are still waiting because I don't like people leaning over them when they're working on it. And that's Nick that was doing the electrical.
Yep.
And all of those bits now are getting painted and put together to go on and fill that bay up. So that one's a little bit out of sequence, but I've made mention a couple of times. I like to get all that wiring laid in before we tape it, so that you can actually get it to lay where you want it. Yeah. And then once you tape it, it'll tend to stay there. And some heat shields to help with some of that heat coming off those pipes. Then all of that silver stuff coming through the firewall there, that's all to do with the computerisation, where it's actually got sensors in every exhaust pipe to help with the tuning process. So it had a huge amount going on, more than I'd ever dealt with in the past. So we finally get to put the motor in. So that's the pipe. So I didn't make those, they were made elsewhere, but that photo was just one of those in the sequence that I would have had for Marco, where you can see the face of that. I've run a file over it to make sure that they're nice and flat, so that when they go on, you're not going to pop a gasket all the time, and just makes things work a bit better.
So I'd be satisfied with the engine sitting in like that, but there's a couple of big snails to go on here yet. There's a lot going on in that engine bay.
And you can see on the right-hand side at the back, we've got a couple of breathers happening there. And I'm trying to think.
Like catch can type thing?
We built 2 catch cans for the breathers, and then there was a third one there that I can't remember what we had going in there, but it was 3, like one tank as a catch can, and then the other one I can't remember exactly what it was doing, but it is a little while ago. So all of these items needed to be treated, painted, polished,
cleared,
whatever they need to
be.
And then I talked about that exhaust where we made a few mods of monstrous exhaust, and then we put those heat shields to try and keep some of the heat away from the floor. And then it had radiator and all was done, so we didn't have too much to do with that. That's what the third one is. It's the catch can's got the breather on it.
Right.
We move on a bit further, so now we've got to get the air in and then back around and in, so it comes in through the front where the spotlight should be, into the turbos, out of the turbo, back up into the top. And then you can see the radiator hose there, snaking around. So there's a lot of stuff to jam in a very small engine bay, I can tell you.
It might be a big car, but there was not much room left.
Exactly right. So Turbo 400, adapted to the Ford, and you can see the rack and pinion with the RRS, and then we still managed to maintain the rear handbrake up the front, so we could use the standard handbrake under the dash, and then adapted it to that crossover setup in the rear. We had to put a little, I think it might have been done by the fab guy actually, where that cable runs across, it wasn't clearance, and it actually had like a piece of tube cut out so it slid in there to enable the adjustment. And then all the things we like to do, those little trinkety bits that make up a nice car. Washers. And then the dash, we sent the dash out and had the dash done professionally. And sent the wheel to Rimblow in New Zealand.
Yep.
Guy over there does a really good job of those. Pretty quick time turnaround. And then of course we had to make carpets fit roll cages and all those sorts of things. And then just that whole process, those bits we've been painting, getting the carpets to all go in, making it all look factory but fit around all of those parts.
Yep.
So that's dash before it went in. Headlight buckets, once again, zinc plating, polished stainless, get all your plastic clips and all the bits and pieces. And then this particular car, we ran just like a traditional underfelt.
Yep.
And was never going to be a quiet car.
No.
So I don't think it was really warranted a whole lot of sound deadening and stuff put in it.
No, it just come with earmuffs. Yeah.
And you can see there now in the front, it's got some Kirkies in it. So he had 2 sets of seats.
Okay.
So they're the race day seats, power cruise, drags, with a harness set up, and then he had the normal XA non-retractable belts, just a standard belt with the original seats like that.
Okay.
So it was the Kirkies bolted into the original holes, so there was no sort of variation.
Yep.
You could bolt one in,
one set,
take one out, put the other in. And that's just a nice shot from the front. So it was always designed not to have anything in the centre sections. We did buy some, remember the wire mesh they used to run on the race cars? There's some of those still in the box of bits and pieces.
To stop small children and birds going into the engine.
Yeah, exactly. So they're still there, and it may be something that Marco has done or will do in the future. And then the rear, pretty much stock GT. And at that point, there was no tips for the exhaust because the exhaust was dumped.
Yep.
But you'll see in a minute, I think somewhere, I love that shot. That was on my phone for a long time. Classic XA.
That was a screensaver.
Yeah. And then one from the top with that nice GT bonnet. And they always look good with the new glass and the new bumpers. And there's another shot of those seats. So obviously we did a bit of a thrash for MotorX. We took it to MotorX before the big engine was done. So we mocked it all up, had it all finished, took it up there, put it on show, and it's the only time it's been in the public, this car. And then it came back, the engine was sent off to be freshened and some changes made. So that's it going on the tilt to go up to Sydney for the show. And that's it waiting to go onto the stand. So 28s and 2010s, 10.5s, I think. So just a classic XA GT spoiler, and effectively what I call a delete stripe GT. So the GT options, but no blackouts. And then the old Mustang stand
gets used
still
a couple
going.
of times. Still
going.
Used to this day.
So this photo here now is after that event.
Okay.
And I realised when I was just looking through now, and this is at that point where, before it went off for the dyno, whereby it had the actual nappies over the heat cooling, and then the wrap on the exhaust and all to keep the heat down.
Yep.
But back to MotorX, this was it on show up there, and there's the video at the start of this show. That video is about a 5-minute interview with me by Street Machine Mag. It's on there.
Thank you, Street Machine.
Yeah, it's on there. It's on their site, on their Which Car site.
Yep.
If you go on there, there's a nice little video of the car there and me talking about what we did and how we did it. And it looked really good on the day, but it didn't compete because it wasn't running. It went into competition class, and then you go into competition class. but it wasn't a competition car type of deal.
That's
So
right.
the idea was just, we had it on Facebook forever, was to take
There's a lot of interest, wasn't
take it somewhere
Yep.
where people could see it.
Yep.
And then what you're looking at now is a video with some really cool sound that we can't hear at the moment, but Louise will dub that over. The sound of this thing being turboed is just so heavy, but not loud, because the turbos tend to take that loudness away.
It's got tips on the exhaust out.
And the tips are on it now, so we actually made those as a set of dummy. Darren made up some brackets and all, so it looks like it's got the full exhaust, but it hasn't. And then someone said, why don't you take the tape off the wheel, when I put it on Facebook? So this was one of those days where it's sitting in the yard running, and I'm going, I should do a video.
Yeah. Quick, grab the camera.
Slam the forward door.
Yep.
So that was pretty much a done deal, and I reckon it was probably at a point where it was going off. So it went to con at Wollongong Automotive Services. They put it on E85, and my understanding was it made like 13 or 1500 on a soft tune.
Soft tune.
And it then come back to me, and the next clip you'll see is Marco driving it out to go onto a trailer. Like, he had a carrier that couldn't get up our place, so he just drove it out the drive and loaded it and took it home. And I spoke to him on the phone today, and pretty much it's been in hibernation ever since he picked it up.
Yes.
And like you said, life takes over.
Yeah, life gets in the road.
But he assures me that it will be out at some point in time. And I know a lot of people are hanging to see it. I know Street Machine would like to shoot it. So it's one of those that's been hidden away. So that's in there. Thanks, mate. Thumbs up.
Yeah, many words. Okay.
And then out the drive, and off it goes. So just sits nice.
Yeah.
Looks good with the tips on the back, and it sounds really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty spec car.
So there it goes.
There's another one. There seems to be a theme, Howard, of cars driving
down the
away
drive.
from your driveway, doesn't
Well,
it?
the best part is a large proportion of them do drive.
Yes.
And they drive down the drive. And it was interesting that I think Street Machine made the comment the other day that my style has gone towards street-driven cars. And I guess even with Tailspin, as much as it was Grandmaster, it's fully registered.
Yep.
It's their club car now.
Gets driven.
And I believe that Peter with Boss XC will do the same thing. And I do take a lot of pride in being able to build a really nice car that sits well at a show, normally scores well at a show, but at the same time you can hop in it and drive it.
Well, look at Cool Mint. They drove that back to bloody Emerald in Queensland. So
that's another one done, and we've still got about 4 or 5 to go. And as we said at the start, thanks to Lovell's Automotive Systems, and I've done a little ad now that goes in our events one, because one of the big things they do, Dale, is they do gross vehicle upgrades. So if you're towing a trailer, towing a caravan, whatever it is, and you know that you're on the borderline or you're overweight, you can actually go to Lovell's and they'll help you with a fully engineered process that upgrades your vehicle to be able to tow the trailer. So a little plug for Lovell's.
Absolutely.
If you get the opportunity, work out how to subscribe. I know a lot of my followers are like me. They're not the youngest blokes and can't work out how to do it.
Just ask someone under the age of 30, they'll tell you.
I was talking to Fuzz the other day. He says, I haven't bloody subscribed, so I don't know how to do it. So if you can work it out, subscribe. Once you've subscribed, you can then, if you're watching it now, click the like button. It helps with what we're doing. The channel's really going well and growing at a great gangbusters.
Make a comment. Leave a comment. Howard loves to answer your comments. Any
Got
spare
nothing
time?
To do. Got nothing to do.
Nothing better to do.
So thanks very much, and we'll keep churning them out. So Thursdays at 3:30. The aim's to continue to bring you something, and hope you enjoyed that one. And the next one will be Tailspin. So I got some homework to do to get that together, because I've got probably 5,000 photos to turn into 350. So thanks very much, and we'll see you for the next one or next week for whatever we're bringing you next week.
Will do.
Thanks for your time, Dale.
Thanks, Howard.
It's been good. It's been a while.
Been a while. Back in the groove, though.
Back in the groove. Thank you all.
Bye for now.